Yeah, hello. Welcome back to the best on-ground Bledisloe Banter. Fantastic to have your company wherever you're watching or listening to the show all over the world. Great feedback on Scott Higginbotham's appearance last week to preview the first Bledisloe test in Sydney or in Australia for 2020. And although that result didn't go well, we thought we'd retain the same model. So really pleased to welcome back Jim Tucker, rugby journalist extraordinaire. And also to welcome the recently retired but fantastic stalwart of the game here in Australia, former New South Wales Waratahs star and former Rupert president Damien Fitzpatrick on the line in Sydney as well. Jim, how are you this morning?
Feeling great, mate. Looks like a really good weekend for rugby up here in Brisbane.
Absolutely, it does. The weather is looking absolutely on point. Fitzy, you're coming into us from Rose Bay in Sydney. How are you, mate?
I'm very wet, actually, Pete. I'd love to be up there where you guys are. No, it is bucketing down here and has been for a while. So I'm really glad the game's actually up in Queensland this week, so it might get some dry weather rugby.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see what type of game plan the Wallabies employ this weekend if it is dry weather rugby, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we need to touch on last week, and it's not the type of podcast where we're going to dwell on it, so we're going to do it pretty quickly. Jim, I'm going to start with you. What was the most disappointing element of the performance last week? But also, is there any silver lining that you can highlight?
I think the overwhelming disappointment last week was how rushed and how much lack of patience there was to everything the Wallabies did. Just that one pass, trying to create a miracle play. And someone like Filippo Dalguna, who had such a good game in Wellington, Dave Rennie has specifically said he just didn't treasure the ball enough, and that's a really big point. If you want to beat the All Blacks, you've just got to retain possession, and that goes into the real bugbear. You're playing against 14 All Blacks and you kick the ball away a couple of times. That is just not on. So unintelligent rugby really gives me the willies.
In terms of a silver lining, there must be something you liked.
I did like the fact Tate McDermott got some time off the bench, didn't seem overawed by the situation at all, and just got in and did his work. And really that's what all the young players who get this chance on the weekend have to do. McDermott's on the bench again, and we'll get another chance.
Yeah, it's exciting to see Tate McDermott. It was great to get that insight into his character from his former teammate Scott Higginbotham last week. Fitzy, have you spoken to anyone in the environment there in the last few weeks to give us a bit of a feel for the mood in the camp under Dave Rennie?
Yeah, I have. I've been, obviously touching base with a couple of closer friends, and they tend to be the older guys in the squad. From all reports, the mood in the squad and the morale and the camaraderie in there is really building to something positive. I think the weekend was, would have been a serious hit to what, they felt they were building. Obviously, they were going into that game, felt that there was a preparation and strategy in place. But I think, Jim absolutely nailed it. I think once New Zealand got out to that kind of 24 or 26-0 lead and, played almost a 30 minutes of perfect rugby there, I think the disappointing thing that the players felt was that they did lose composure and they started to throw away possession. And what really bugged me was just some of the loose possessions straight off set piece, which is just, it's a coach killer when you lose that kind of possession in the first two phases. So, I know that they're really hurting after that game because, and particularly for some of those young players, a loss like that can sting, but they've got to try and move on from it as best they can.
In terms of selection this week, plenty of changes in there. One guy who you mentioned, Jim, Filippo Dalguna, he loses his starting spot. We'd spoken a few times over the course of the year about concerns with whether it's his technique or whether it's his temperament, that he has seen a fair bit of time on the sidelines due to cards from referees. And we know that he has some X factor. We know that he's got some defensive starch, but at test footy level against the All Blacks, you can't afford to be giving them a one-man advantage in the third minute. He drops to the bench. But the big talking point really for the Wallabies is naming Reece Hodge in the 10 jersey. He gets an opportunity there to play in a jersey he's played very little professional rugby in. Hunter Paisami comes in and starts at 12. Again, not his normal position. Lockie Swinton comes in for his starting debut in the 6 jersey, and also on the bench, Angus Bell, an opportunity for him to potentially make his Wallaby debut as well. Jim, are you happy with the changes that have been made to the 23 there? Talk us through what's caught your eye.
Well, I guess with Hodge, there's a lot of disconcerting word about Hodge playing 10, but I'm a much more fair weather view on Hodge because I saw him play there in 2017 against Japan. It was only Japan in Yokohama, but he's an experienced player. He played a lot of club footy there at number 10, and he just did his job. He shifted the ball quite well. He dropped back to support Kurtley Beale in the setup to a nice try, made his tackles in the front line. He was just an experienced player. And Australia used to do that sort of stuff. If we're in a bit of a crisis, we've got a COVID squad in a bubble. There's no O'Connor, no Tamua, so you've got to be a bit smart. I go back to, say, Rod Kafer. His debut, he's a total inside centre, and he made his test debut against the All Blacks at fly half in 1999, and they won by 21 points. No one's predicting that this weekend, mind you, but that was a sensible call by the Wallabies. He was 28, an experienced player. Hodges played 42 tests, so I'm backing him to sort of be sensible and give some direction to the side. Other selections, Tom Wright. I really like his footwork and what he gives on the wing. He's an out-and-out finisher, so another nice winger to have a look at. Lachie Swinton, it's tough, isn't it? He's only 23, yet he comes in and everyone's saying he's the enforcer. Like he's just creating his own way in the game at the moment. So let's let him find his feet, let him do some of the best stuff he does, hang on to the ball because his hands are probably a little bit of a weakness for him, but he's a good player. And Fitzy would probably have a bit of a view on Swinton being so close to him down at the Waratahs.
You know, I'll exactly ask Fitzy that and about a couple of other Waratahs guys, and then I know that you want to jump in and ask Fitzy a couple of things as well, Jim. But Fitzy, firstly, Swinton debuts, Angus Bell almost certainly does. Tell us a little bit what we should expect from them, but also Rob Simmons comes into the starting lineup. Ned Hannigan drops to the bench, but he looks like he'll be the lock cover. What have you made of the Waratahs boys in gold so far in the last few weeks? And tell us a bit about the new boys.
Yeah, there's a bit of movement with the Waratahs players this week in the Wallaby squad. Look, I'm so excited to watch Lachie Swinton play his first game. When he came into the Waratahs, I've really watched him from coming through the academy into the senior squad and into be a regular starter in the Waratahs. You know, with Lachie, what you see is what you get. The way he trains is the way he plays, and not all and sometimes timing doesn't always go on his side. But he is one of the most fiercest competitors, fiercely loyal teammates you can have. And I imagine that's why Dave Rennie might be looking to try and shake things up a little bit in that space, because coming off a loss like that, you go two directions. You keep the team the same and see if they pull themselves back, or do you make some changes and see if you can ruffle some feathers. And I know Swino's not going to go down wondering in his test debut. I think he's one of those guys that's definitely just going to go out there and play the game that he knows how to play, and that's an aggressive style, hard game of rugby, and I'm really looking forward to him because he works so hard, and I know he'll lift the guys around him. I really like, and I don't know, I'm sure it wasn't purposely done, but I like the fact that Simo is coming back into the starting side. Someone like Lachie Swinton, I think, is going to really benefit from having another senior guy in and around that line-out time. So Simo obviously has played with Swino a lot. He's going to make sure that transition between gameplay into set piece, where you do need to calm the blood a little bit, is going to be really helpful. So for Swino coming in, having someone like Hoops and also Simo there trying to just make sure when the set piece time comes along, he knows his role, I think it's going to be really helpful. Angus Bell, another one, really excited to see. I think he's got a huge test future. I've been nothing but praise for him since he kind of came into the professional environment. Very professional approach to the way that he plays the game, understands, as a front row, you don't overplay your hand around the field, even though we do know he's got all of those strings to his bow. So really, I'm really keen to see what he does at test level, because I think it's probably the start of quite a long test career.
Jim, from your end, Rob Simmons, someone you've watched play a lot for the Reds and covered him up here, and Fitzy obviously has played alongside him at the Waratahs in the last couple of years. We know that Lukan Salakai-Lotto drops out due to injury. We know that Rob Simmons is heading towards the twilight of his Wallabies career. But do you think he will have a positive impact on that Wallabies set piece being there from the offset?
I think Fitzy made a really good, insightful comment there that you need experienced guys around just to plot the most important parts of the game, like the set piece. When Australia's won their lineouts well, you suddenly get that little bit of flow in the game. That's the part of the game where the defences are separated from the attack most of all. And if you get a nice little bit of a flow on there, you really can make some inroads. So big tick for Simo there. Probably a diversion there is Simo's on the field with his great mate James Slipper, who's celebrating 100 tests this weekend. And that's a huge milestone for the travails that Slips had to go through in his career. He didn't play test rugby for over 2 years, and he's still hitting 100 tests at the age of 31. So a huge servant to the game, and he rekindled his love of the game. And from that test last week, you asked about positives. Slips was hitting blokes with great tackles in that first half. So he's really thoroughly deserving of his role in this test match, and it's a great achievement to hit 100 tests.
Yeah, absolutely it is. A fantastic story with James Slipper, and you feel like that there's plenty still to write in that one. Question for both of you, and we know we've still got a couple of tests to come against the Pumas, but it was a pretty big 44-man squad that was named. Is there anyone we haven't seen yet that you're really hoping we do get to see before the end of the year? Start with yourself there, Damien.
Yeah, I mean, if we, depending on the severity of where James O'Connor's injury is at, I personally would love to see a Will Harrison maybe step into a game and see how he controls things at test level, because we know that there's going to be an opportunity there leading into 2023, and we've got two very good young tens. Noah obviously got a crack last week against New Zealand. I would like to see how someone like Will Harrison kind of comes in and steps up, because I was hugely impressed with the way he was able to step into Bernard Foley's shoes for the Waratahs this year and start to control not only the way we play, but also the language and the communication with the team throughout the week. For such a young guy, I was hugely impressed with how he took that on his shoulders. So he's someone that I'd love to see get an opportunity.
Jim?
I'd probably say Liam Wright. He's just had those few little minutes in the series so far, and he's one of those really astute on-the-ball players who rips you back a key turnover just at the right time, tackles his heart out, has improved his ball carting game. So he's one of those combative guys that I think will do well against the All Blacks with a little bit more of a chance. And against the Pumas, I think he will get probably a start in that back row.
And I'm going to show my former loyalties a little bit there and say Trevor Hosea, coming through the Melbourne Rebels pathway a couple of years up here at Brisbane Boys College as well. By all accounts, hugely impressive in camp. We know the second row, there's not a huge amount of depth at the moment. Played well against the Argentinians in a bit of a scratch match last week, and love to see him get an opportunity. And I think with Trevor Hosea, one of the things that really stands out to me is that he's been given what is a pretty rare opportunity in Super Rugby to develop at his own pace within a professional program. He's been part of that Rebels squad for 3 or 4 years now, but has had to wait for his debut, and they've taken a really patient approach with him, looking at him as a long-term player. And with having so few Super Rugby teams and so few contracts, we don't see that a lot of times. We see a lot of young, talented players end up overseas, by the age of 23, 24, because they haven't necessarily cracked it immediately. So I'd love to see him get an opportunity at some point. Fitzy, I want to talk about the hookers. You know that position better than either of us on the call, but better than most within Australian rugby. How have you viewed Brandon Paenga-Amosa's series so far? Because he seems to have nailed on that starting spot. And obviously we've got Folau Fainga comes back onto the bench this week in place of Jordan Uelese. Tom Horton's been with the squad for a bit. Connell McInerney in there now as well. How do you see that battle going?
Yeah, I mean, it's ongoing, isn't it? We've seen now 3 changes, in the 4 weeks in that space. As you said, I think Brandon looks like he's got the nod at the moment with the coaching staff. I don't have the privilege of obviously knowing too deep into what the coaches are looking for in that particular role, but knowing enough about what you've got to do as a hooker, nailing your throws is one thing. And I know Brandon in the last few weeks has been able to do that. And that goes a long way, to making sure that you're at least getting a look in that position. There's some change there with Fainga and Ulysses. I know last week there was some wayward throwing in the back end of the game there, which, they say I personally say is one of the most difficult times to come on and start to throw is the back end of the game as a new hooker, because you don't know the rhythm of the game, and it's much harder than people actually think. It'll be interesting this weekend. You see New Zealand made change at hooker as well. Dane Coles has dropped out, and obviously they've got Afua coming in on the bench, Amosa. So he's a pretty damaging ball runner as well. But I think there's a great opportunity this weekend to put their line out under some heat, because personally I don't think either of their hookers are amazing under pressure when it comes to throwing either. So I think it's something that I know Simo will be looking at. But hopefully our guys also try and stamp their mark against those two guys as well.
Jim, Suncorp Stadium better than most of us. Of course, you're part of the Media Hall of Fame for Suncorp Stadium, and I dare say for Saturday evening's game, you'll probably be having an 11-course degustation behind glass and sitting next to the Premier of the state. But in all seriousness, talk us through the Wallabies' record at Suncorp Stadium over recent years, because it has been a pretty happy hunting ground, despite a challenging few years against the All Blacks.
Well, I mean, literally, it's the best place in the world to play the All Blacks, because the record there in terms of beating them is second to none. 2011, 2017, both wins for the Wallabies, but it's how tight the matches are generally. I think we go back to 2014, Colin Slade knocked over an angled conversion just to pip Ewan McKenzie's team there on the bell. That was a tough one to take. And there was a draw in there as well. So it's a real venue to take on the All Blacks. It must be said the All Blacks come to town with the Bledisloe most often in their pouch, and just minor trinkets up for grabs when they come to Suncorp. So perhaps a little less intensity from them, more from us. And I think the Wallabies really like that cauldron of rectangular stadium, the crowd right on top of them, and it's a fast field. So they play fast rugby there. And it's always been a real spectacle. So that's the one thing. I think it'll play to some of those Queenslanders involved this week, like your Tate McDermott's, Liam Wrights, Hunter Paisami, Jordan Patea, guys like that who really call it home. So there's some definite advantages there for the Wallabies.
Fitzy, we've heard a little bit of talk this week from Dave Rennie about the 4-year plan, and Rome wasn't built in a day. We understand that. It's a term we use or we hear throughout world rugby. We're hearing the Welsh Rugby Union use it at the moment as well. And we know that Dave Rennie will need time, not only to develop the side around tactically what he expects from them and to work on the combinations that he wants, but also because we've lost so much experience. So it's a new coach, but it's also a lot of new players. That being said, 4 years is a really, really long time. What's your viewpoint on Dave Rennie, mentioning that in his press conference, and how much leeway do you give him, man? Where do you think the 4-year plan sits as things currently stand?
Look, and I'll come from two angles here as a fan and a spectator of the game. Yeah, those kind of comments are definitely wielding to try and appease the fans and the spectators about managing expectations on the team. But taking a step back, and I'll come back to it from a recently retired player perspective, the 4-year process doesn't sit very well with me as a player, because at the end of the day, does that mean coaches are looking at players for how they might perform on potential in 4 years' time, when you may have someone who, as we've spoken about, you've got someone like a Slips or a Simo, if they're getting on in years, does that mean because they're not in potential plans for 4 years' time, that do you not start selecting them based on how they're currently playing at the time? So I think as a player's point of view, hearing a 4-year plan, for me personally, I don't agree with, as long as it doesn't come into selection, because at the end of the day, it's got to be picked on form, not on what form's going to be in 4 years' time. But I understand why coaches do talk about that, because probably when they're negotiating their contracts, it's all written in there, and they put together their proposal planning, and they just try and, to make sure that rhetoric, is put out there to manage expectations. But from a player's point of view, I totally disagree with that kind of thing, and believe players should be picked on form at the exact time, because otherwise it's just, it's really, for older players, it's almost, it's a bit of a slap in the face.
Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, good thinking there, Fitzy, on that. I'll put the boot on the other foot. If I was in New Zealand, you'd absolutely be laughed out of the country if you ever said you had a 4-year plan. They want to win every test, and they just about do. That goes to the heart of what Kiwi footy is about. I think Scott Robertson is a better coach than Ian Foster, full stop. But the baton change through the All Black system is you have a coach, Hansen pass on to Foster, and you keep a continuity there. You look at Australian rugby, what we're dealing with is just over 12 months ago, there's only 3 survivors in the starting team from that test we lost to England at the World Cup, and that's Patea, Alan Alalatoa, and Michael Hooper. Fast forward, that's only 3 survivors to this test match in the starting side we're playing on the weekend. So the turnovers is enormous. So every new coach comes in and everything starts again. And that's a wider issue for Australian rugby, because you want to see more of a continuity, and some of the golden-haired children picked by Michael Checker should still be golden-haired children being advanced in Dave Rennie's system. So there's a few bigger picture things there that maybe have to be smoothed for Australian rugby. So I dislike the 4-year plan notion. Sure, you can say, okay, the big picture is doing well in France in 2023, but I want my Wallaby teams running on the field, eyeballs rolling, and trying to win every test, and thinking we've got the best team every week.
Very well said by both of you. I think the reality is that the Australian rugby public will be relatively patient with Dave Rennie. The sentiment around his appointment has been really positive. People are really pleased that we've got such an able coach has come in. The talk in the squad around culture and around how he's bringing those different cultures together has been really impressive, results aside. But avoid that 4-year mention. Plead a bit of patience, but also, demand immediacy as well, and demand improvement, and let's work on cohesion and partnerships and picking the very best people to go out there and get the job done. We've only got a few minutes left, but really quickly, a lot of speculation in the media in recent days, especially, but over the last month or so as well, that Channel 9 is looking to come in and sign a broadcast deal with Rugby Australia for 2021 onwards. It would see a limited amount of Super Rugby live on free-to-air television, with the rest of it likely to go on Nine's streaming service, Stan. It could also use the secondary channels, 9 Go, 9 Gem, and the like. Wallabies test live on free-to-air as well, and would see an end to rugby being behind the paywall with Fox Sports. Fitzy, what's your take on this? Do you think it'd be a positive for the game if Hamish McLennan, Rob Clark, and the Rugby Australia team were able to get that across the line?
I personally do, and I know not everyone's going to agree with that, but I personally think from some of the conversations I've sat in this year for Ruper and had a really strong look at where the game is at, and obviously what the fans and the broader public want to see from our code. If we were to go and sign a very same broadcast deal, I think it would be much, I think it would be the disappointment of a lot of people. I think right now rugby's in a position where if we can make any decisions that's not business as usual, I think it's going to be really positive. And if, coming on with a different broadcast deal under a different structure, a Stan and a free-to-air model, and then you mirror that up with quite a few some clever marketing and maybe some new partners, I think there is potential there to bring in a whole new fan base and new look for the game, which I think will be positive. Yeah, and I know that might be controversial, and there's some Heartland fans that might not agree with that and prefer it on Fox as a traditional broadcaster. But I think something now to show that Rugby Australia is thinking outside the box, I think is going to be really positive.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm with you, and I think it's the best way that we can look to expand our fan base. I think that's really important, that we don't just rely on the rusted on. The flip side, though, and I'll put this to you, Jim, Australian rugby, there's not a lot of cash in the bank, pre-pandemic, let alone post. The reports, if they're to be believed, suggest that the Fox offer is more money in the bank. and the 9/Stan offer is slightly less money, and also a fair degree of that deal is contra that'll be used around advertising. So is it a risk for Rugby Australia to be turning down extra funds to make this happen?
Definitely. The bottom line is a huge factor in all of this. But as Fitzy said, that having that free-to-air component, like, how can you have heroes if you don't see them? We're talking back to the Elise Perry example. She never saw women's cricket on TV. So she didn't have heroes until she could see a little bit of women's cricket on TV. So that's the same situation here. You want perhaps rugby with a free-to-air component on Channel 9. I watch the NFL a lot. Channel 7, they have multiple channels, and you go down through them, 7 mates, 7 plus, whatever it is, you find the NFL somewhere else. People get reconditioned. I think Fox are also rejigging their concept with KO as well, providing a free access game and different things. So I think the discussion has been really good, because this environment is not the normal environment, and people are trying to think of ways to change the status quo. And I think that's what rugby definitely needs. But having some free-to-air component is absolutely essential. New Super Rugby, perhaps a new Tri-Nations Rugby Championship in the years to come, must have a different mix so people can watch it on free-to-air.
Yeah, creativity, innovation. We said off the top that Rob Clark would bring that to the role when he took on the job as interim CEO of Rugby Australia. He's certainly doing that. Broadcast is a piece I find fascinating. So I'm not a lot of fun at parties, but I follow trends overseas and have a look at kind of what's going. And I think it is a positive approach from Rugby Australia, and it's good to see them taking some risks. Fitzy, you and I have spent a lot of time speaking over the years about our vision for the game. And if you'd told me, pandemic or not, that heading into 2021 we'd have Super Rugby without South Africa, we'd have a potential free-to-air broadcast deal, and we'd have 5 Aussie teams and the Western Force back in the mix, well, I absolutely would bite your hand off to get that offer. We've got about 2 minutes left, Fitzy. We need to know, mate, life post-footy. Firstly, I'd love to know if the pandemic influenced your decision to hang up the boots this year, but also tell us a bit about what you're doing now and future involvement in rugby for yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Mate, and I think you probably did call some of these changes about 4 years ago, which I'll give you credit for. But COVID wasn't the catalyst for retirement, but probably just changed the timing of my retirement. I was going to retire at the end of this Super Rugby season traditionally anyway, which would have been mid-June. When COVID hit, I just decided with the Waratahs that, a new fresh look for the Waratahs going into a new Super Rugby AU competition. I just thought it best for the team to get guys like Tom Horton on the field and conditioned into what will be obviously a more stable position going forward. So look, we just made that decision together, and it did kind of suit me well. I've started my own business, and it's a very strange year. We started at the end of 2019, and it was probably really timely because COVID's forced every business to have a very quick lesson, or for me particularly, very fast lesson in how to problem solve, and every business had to look introspectively at the kind of strategy. So we were doing a lot of our trade. We're in consumer health products, and we did a lot of our trade through duty free in our airports, and obviously that came to a crashing halt incredibly quickly. So being able to step away from rugby and take a full-time role in our business, and I was thankful that we didn't have too many staff on board at the time, and weren't put in the position with headaches about trying to manage, trying to keep staff and that kind of thing. We only had a few very difficult conversations to have, but I know for big business that was obviously one of the main things on their agenda. But I'd love to stay involved in rugby. I'm still heavily involved in Rupa. I'm going to remain on their board. That part of the game and the players is something I'm incredibly passionate about, and also the level of rugby administration at an overall level as well. Like I love that side of the game, and I think there is so much that we can do as a sport in the future, and I'd love to be involved in some way. How that looks, I'm not too sure, but my personality, Pete, I'm a busybody, so if there's some way I can help out, I will.
Fantastic. Well, Australian Rugby is very lucky to have you. Jim, anything further from you before we wrap this one up?
Mate, all good from me. I'm just hoping the Wallabies really stand tall. We got a lot of confidence out of what they showed in Wellington, not so much in the 2 tests that followed. So really important they finish this block of matches with a resonant performance on Saturday night, whether it's a win or just a really super competitive performance.
Yeah, very well said. Fitzy, we're going to give Bondi Vite a plug. That was very kind of you not to name drop your business there. And you know that I'm in conversations with the likes of Qantas, who've suddenly freed up some of their marketing budget. But as things currently stand, we don't have a naming rights sponsor for the podcast. So Bondi Vite, Damien's company, make sure you check that out. Fantastic supplements and vitamins, and just renewed their deal as the official supplier for the New South Wales Waratahs as well. Fitzy, thanks so much for coming on board, mate, providing so much insight into, I guess, not only the game as it stands more broadly, but also this weekend ahead of Bledisloe 4. Really appreciate your time.
No, thanks for inviting me, Pete. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for watching and listening to the Best on Ground Bledisloe Banter. Make sure you share this with your mates, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Otherwise, let's hope we're celebrating a Wallabies win this weekend. Cheers.